Welcome to Type C Tech Reviews. Today we're going to be doing a review of the Samsung Odyssey G7 or G70B. If at any point during the video you want to check out this exact same monitor, there's Amazon links below for the US, UK, Canada, and international links, but let's jump into it. Alright, now starting off, this either comes in 32 or 28-inch screen sizes, and today I'll be testing the 32-inch screen size. That being said, online, just looking from the specs, there are substantial differences between the 28 and the 32-inch screen size variants, such as significantly lower color coverage and brightness on the 28-inch variant. Now, this may be not the case after testing, but just from the specs, it looks like these are definitely very different panels. So that's definitely something to consider, especially if you're going to get the 28-inch. Well, just from the specs, I probably wouldn't recommend it. I'd probably just bump it up to the 32, but definitely find a review for the 28-inch. Because I probably will not be doing that one here. But let's talk the 32. So resolution, 3840 by 2160 or 4K. This screen size to resolution is the absolute perfect resolution to screen size. This brings the PPI or pixels per inch, essentially how crisp and clear the image is actually going to appear to your eye. This brings it to about 138. Now 138 pixels per inch means games, images, movies all appear perfectly crisp and clear. Even very small text has no visible pixelation. That's why I'm saying this is the perfect screen size to resolution. As for the panel type, this is an IPS or in-plane switching panel, which is a Samsung panel. They typically do VA panels, but I guess that they're definitely doing more IPS panels, and they are one of the 3 leading companies that builds IPS panels, so they should be pretty good at it, although not a bunch in monitors, but they seem to be doing more of them. Now, a huge pro here is the finish. Now, most gaming monitors or monitors in general come with a very matte finish. Now, this degrades picture quality. This isn't talked about a lot of the time, but a matte finish does degrade picture quality. We're just so used to it that it becomes normal. However, this uses a matte, hybrid, glossy finish, so it's kind of somewhere in the middle there. Now, we first saw this on the LG 32 GQ 950 and 850, the 950 being direct competition for this monitor, also a 32-inch 4K IPS panel, and this is a really good thing. Having this finish is fantastic. This makes the clarity, contrast, colors just more vibrant. It's something you'll notice immediately if you're used to your typical matte finishes. So that's a really big pro here. Now, as for the refresh rate, this maxes out at 144 Hz, but a big pro here is this has full G-Sync, and this is not just G-Sync compatibility, no, this is G-Sync. That's going to be a huge pro for some of you. Now, this works quite well, and when compared to the biggest competition, which would be the LG 32 GQ 950, I'm going to be comparing it a lot to that monitor throughout this video. The GQ 950 basically across the board does a lot of things better than this monitor, but in this specific case, the LG only has FreeSync Premium Pro and NVIDIA G-Sync compatibility, whereas this one, well, it has full G-Sync, which is nice. All right, but now let's talk brightness. This is rated for 350 nits of brightness and SDR content, which is a good brightness. But for the price point, it's probably not what you want. However, after testing, this managed to reach about 400 nits of brightness in SDR. Now that's good, it's not great, especially when considering the price point. And when you compare it to the LG 32 GQ 950, which after testing, that one reached 520 nits of brightness in SDR, well, the differences are quite substantial there. And seeing that these are pretty similar prices, and this is going to change depending on the different countries you're in, but right now, the LG is actually cheaper. The experience is really enjoyable on this panel, but it's not on the level of the LG panel. Now, HDR here is another spot where this is kind of lacking. Now, I do want to say 400 nits is not lacking, it's just lacking comparatively. But the HDR here is not the case. The HDR here is not great. Firstly, it doesn't have full ray local dimming and it's not a VA panel, so you're not gonna have super deep blacks. But that's out of the way. All IPS panels aren't really gonna have that unless they're mini LED lit. However, what HDR does allow you is the full color coverage there. That's where you're getting the wider color gamut. So you do get nicer colors, but the highlights don't pop out of the screen because it doesn't have a high enough brightness and a high enough peak brightness. And the HDR tuning is just not the best. It blows out a lot of the image. The gamma's not at a 2.2, it's really at a 2.0. It's easy to fix that. Just go into the contrast enhancer and setting that to low. I talked about that on the G6 review that I also did, and that basically fixes it. after testing that actually brought it up to a 2.2. So that's kind of how it should be used most of the time. But yeah, it's still worth gaming in HDR for the colors, but you're not really getting a great HDR experience. And when compared to the LG 32GQ950, which has an HDR 1000 rating, the highlights definitely pop out of the screen. No, you're still not getting deep blacks there, but that panel probably had the best HDR experience that you can possibly get right now in an IPS panel that does not have full array local dimming. So for an IPS panel, that was the absolute best HDR experience I've ever had. And the difference between the LG and this one's HDR is night and day. Now again, this may not matter for you depending on, well, if you want to use HDR or if you don't want to use HDR. However, again, if you like HDR, I'd definitely recommend the LG. Now, I do want to say I'm beating on this one a lot, but please watch until the price and value section because I do think this is a really good monitor. All right, now let's talk colors. Colors are pretty good here, covering 95% of the DCI-P3 color space, so that's where you're gonna get the HDR performance. But how is the accuracy out of the box? It was not quite as good as I was expecting it to be, but it's still, well, plenty good enough for if you're just a typical gamer. But this is pre-calibrated from Samsung, so I did expect it to be just a little bit better. Now, the biggest thing here was the color temperature. The color temperature was way off from the factory, being quite a bit too cold, hitting a 7,388 kelvins with a target of 6,500 kelvins. However, I went into the settings, the color tone settings, and I changed it from the standard to a natural setting, which on the Odyssey G6 made it almost perfect out of the box, which was surprising. But this one, unfortunately, made it substantially cooler at 8,381 kelvins. That's very, very cool and quite a bit off from a 6,500 Kelvin target. Now, if these numbers don't mean anything to you, it's just way too cool. It was too of a blue tint. But lastly, I went into warm 1, and this was the best setting out of the box. It was the closest, hitting 5,936 Kelvin, still being too warm, so on the other side of it, but it was definitely the best setting out of them all, and that's probably the one that I would, if I was getting it, probably set it in that one and then just use that. However, if you do want to calibrate this, it actually calibrated pretty well, and it was like bang on. I think it was 6,600, which is very, very good. But again, if you're like most people, this is not a problem. Now, last thing, talking about gamma, this was definitely off and not hitting a 2.2 target. And basically what this is going to do is those blacks are going to be a little bit more washed out than it should be. But if you set the contrast enhancer, which is really just changing gamma, if you set that to the low setting, not the high setting, if you set it to the low setting, it brings it almost perfectly to 2.2 gamma, which is very good. So those are the kind of settings you do. Set it to warm 1, set the contrast enhancer to low, and you're pretty dang good out of the box, especially if you're just a gamer. Now, what about color accuracy? Well, there's no real point in talking about this because if you want to do professional photo or video editing, this is just not the monitor. I would definitely get the LG 32GQ950 as that has a wider color gamut, a significantly better calibration out of the box, and it's overall just better, especially if you do want to calibrate it. That's just a better monitor, and they're relatively similar price points. But obviously with the calibration, this one could definitely do some photo and video editing. And if you're just talking YouTube videos and you're not doing color grading, well, both of these are gonna work great. And lastly, this thing can output 10 bits of color at full 144 Hertz. All right, now contrast ratio is typical for IPS panels at 1,000 to 1. Now, local dimming, how is it? It's edge lit. It's got like 16 zones, it's bad. All edge lit IPS panels all edge lit local dimming is pretty bad most of the time. This is no exception here. You're not going to ever be using it. I would recommend just turning it off all the time. It never kicks on. Yeah, it's classic. It's just bad on all monitors. Now, as for backlight bleed, my unit didn't have any. But talking about IPS glow, this did have someone going at, well, your more extreme angles, obviously, but the thing with this is when you compare it to the LG 32GQ950, which had the ATW polarizer, which essentially allows for better viewing angles with less degradation of the display, that had like almost no IPS glow when compared to this. So that's another point where it's like, well, the GQ950 may be better. I'm not gonna say 100% of the time it's not, and that's the price and value section because both monitors are very good monitors, but definitely stick around there for the price and value. That's where we really go into it and when this is worth it and when it's not. Now, response time and ghosting. We expect this to do quite well because this is an IPS panel at a fairly high price point. Well, firstly, this has an extreme amount of pixel overshooting or inverse ghosting in the two fastest response time settings, which is faster and extreme. Now, that's both with variable refresh rate on or off. Now, in the standard setting, which is the lowest setting, That's like the fastest setting. That should be the fastest setting. There's very little ghosting, like very, very, very little ghosting. Even with faster pans, extremely small amounts of smearing. Now this isn't quite as good as the LG, but it's such a negligible difference that it's probably not going to affect real life gameplay at all. So that's, well, it's overall fantastic. We expect that at this price point, although it was weird that there was inverse ghosting at the 2 fastest response times. I think it's like, why'd you do that? But whatever, it's fantastic, and there's nothing else really to be said about that. Gaming on this, especially fast-paced games, are fantastic. It's great, it looks beautiful, and it's very fast. It's classic IPS panel stuff. Also, I do want to say, if you do want to use this with an Xbox Series S, X, or PS5, you can absolutely do that. This works very well, and we'll get into the ports, but this, well, spoiler alert, this has HDMI 2.1, so you're good to go. We expect that at this price point. Absolutely we do. But yeah, so if you do want to game with a console, this works great for that. Let's talk about the OS, menu system, and the controls. There's a lot of interesting stuff here. Now, firstly, this has the Samsung Game Bar. This is Tizen, which is their smart TV OS system, which is now just not a smart TV, but also a smart monitor system. Now, I do want to say, you might look at this and like, this is a reason to get this monitor. It has cloud streaming services like Xbox Game Pass and Google Stadia and GeForce Now and Amazon Luna, right? Amazon Luna. So it's got all of those, which you can cloud game on, which are actually really cool and enjoyable. But one thing to say, and in the G6 review, that was a big section of that monitor, this is definitely a reason to get this. As I said before, this is a content machine. If you want to watch Netflix and use one display while only having maybe a PC hooked up to it, but you also want to game with a controller with those cloud gaming services, but you also want to go to YouTube quickly, I mean, it's so easy to use. And especially since they give you a remote, it just works really well. But this isn't confirmed, but I'm really thinking that this OS system is going to be on all future Samsung monitors, at least the like mid to higher tier ones. They're probably not going to be on the budget ones, but on the mid to high tier ones, it's probably going to be on all of them. So you kind of have to weigh like, is that worth it? And if you already have an Xbox or a PS5 and a PC that you're going to be using both of those with, it kind of makes the OS like there's no reasons for it because the PS5 or the Xbox is already its own OS. But again, like I said, if you only have one bedroom and you only have a PC, this is really, really cool to use. It also has like Apple AirPlay and you have Wi-Fi and Bluetooth hooked up to it. I mean, it works really well for the purpose of using it like a smart TV or like a smart gaming TV. It works really well. But the negative side here is that you should not buy this monitor unless you do want that OS system, because when you go in the menu system, everything like that, even to switch your inputs, like to go to whatever your display port and everything, you have to go through that OS system. So if you don't want this, it could get annoying, but if you want this, it's really good. Like, it's very well polished, especially since this is the first time I think we've ever seen a gaming monitor with its own OS on it. Like, they did this quite well for being the first time anyone's done this. Okay, so the remote is really nice. It's USB Type-C, so there's no batteries in it. Well, I guess there's a battery, but not like one of those disposable batteries. That's really cool. The buttons feel nice. They've got nice rockers for the volume. There's just a lot of good things here. Now, there are like controls on the monitor which don't make any sense because they basically are unusable. So if you're using this, you're gonna be using the remote. I think this works great. It's super fast and responsive, so I don't mind it. But if you are like, I don't want to be using a remote to control my monitor, again, like I'm saying, this could get annoying for you, but I think this is a big pro. So again, if you want a 4K high refresh rate panel, but don't want that OS built in, or you already have an Xbox or a PS5 and a PC, I'd probably go for the LG 32GQ950. If you want a super premium at this like around $1,000 price point, 4K 32-inch high refresh rate gaming monitor, but there's plenty of other options that are cheaper that are not quite as premium, like Gigabyte's M32U or Acer Predator XB283K. Those are significantly cheaper, also 4K, also high refresh rate, but don't quite have like the HDR of LG. But this one also doesn't have HDR. So you're really getting kind of the look of this and that OS system. All right, but talking about volume and stuff like that, let's talk about the speakers. The speakers are quite good here. Like I said on the G6 review, I believe these are the exact same speakers and they're really good. They're incredibly clear. There's not a ton of bass, obviously, but there's enough where it like sounds good, but music is probably not something you're gonna wanna listen to a bunch. However, they're super clear, and for gaming on these, I actually gamed on these and was quite enjoyable. They get super loud and they never rattle even at super loud volumes, which is really impressive. They also come from the bottom, so a lot of monitor speakers that face backwards just don't sound good because it doesn't sound like the sound is coming at you. It doesn't sound like it's coming from the display itself. But with those pointing down, it actually sounds good. It sounds like it's like coming towards you, which I like. Overall, this is really good. Let's move into Vesa compatibility. If you do want to mount this, you can do it with 100mm by 100mm Vesa mounts, and that is using a bracket that you screw to the back of it, but that comes in the package, so not a big deal. All right, but let's talk ports. This has two HDMI 2.1, so if you wanted your PS5 or your Xboxes or whatever, works great for that. One DisplayPort 1.4, one USB Type-B upstream, and then two USB Type-A downstreams. You also have an Ethernet, again, for that OS system, and a 3.5mm audio out. But besides the Ethernet, you also have Wi-Fi connectivity, so there's a Wi-Fi chip inside of this, and you have Bluetooth, which is very cool. All right, now stand and build quality is typical for Samsung, which is not really the best thing. The stand feels cheap and wobbly. It has great adjustability with height, tilt, swivel, and full rotation, both to the left and right, going fully vertical. So the adjustability is good, but it doesn't feel really high quality. Also, this has RGB, which they did a really good job with. The RGB out of the back of it is bright enough to hit the wall and kind of glow, so that's really cool. And the RGB on the front is not really noticeable directly to your eye when you're gaming, which is a good thing because it's quite bright and it's kind of blinding, but it's not noticeable when you're actually using this except for a slight glow. But then when you're farther back, it looks very cool and makes this look unique. And overall, I think they did a good job. You can also change all the colors and everything like that quite easily. So that's good. It looks unique. I like the design, but it just doesn't feel expensive at all. All right, but now price and value, the most important section of the video and the most difficult for me to write or to speak, but I wrote it already. So, okay, so this retails for $999.99, basically $1,000. The 28-inch variant retails for $200 less than that, but again, just looking from the specs, probably doesn't look like that's quite as worth it as this one. And for that price, I personally would definitely go with the LG 32GQ950, which is currently priced in the United States for $899.99. That's on sale from its $1,300 list price, but I haven't really seen it hit that $1,300 list price, at least in the United States, for a very long time. So with the LG being $100 cheaper, and for someone like me, which has a bunch of different setups and gaming setups and TV setups and everything like that, I don't need a single monitor with an OS. I also have Xboxes. The LG just makes more sense to me, especially because I loved the HDR performance in it, even though it was an IPS panel. But that being said, if you really want the OS, if you really want to do cloud gaming and things like that, this could definitely be worth it when it's on sale. Or if in your country, the LG is at its list price of $1,300 and this one's at $1,000. I still think that's a lot to pay for what this monitor is, especially when there's monitors like the Gigabyte M32U, which are definitely not as premium as the LG, but they're significantly cheaper. But it's very difficult to value this monitor, especially because prices change. And a lot of times what Samsung does is put monitors at big price points just so they can drop them to make it seem like you're getting a really good value. So I would say around an $800 price point is where this becomes a really good value. But if the LG is at a $900 price point and this one's at a $1,000 price point, and you really just want the display, not the OS, the LG is just better across the board with a wider color gamut. I think it even has a higher refresh rate because it's overclocked. It's got an ATW polarizer. It's got better color accuracy out of the box. It's got a way higher brightness, both in SDR and HDR, and the HDR performance is significantly better, not even to mention the way leaps and strides better build quality. So for all of those reasons, I would personally pick the LG currently, but this all depends on sales. So whenever you're watching this, if it is on sale, you're just gonna have to take this review and kind of judge for yourself whether it's worth it or not for you. So overall, do I recommend this monitor? Well, if you just want the panel and the LG 32GQ950 is the same price or cheaper than this, I definitely recommend that over this, as it beats this in almost every area. But if this is on sale and you really want the built-in OS, then yes, I definitely recommend this. Again, if you wanna check out either of these monitors, there's Amazon links below for the US, UK, Canada, and international links. And if you want to check out my 32GQ950 review, it'll be right there. You can check out that. That's the review that I did of the LG. Definitely a great monitor, but for me personally, I'm going with that model right there. All right, this is Type-C Tech Reviews, and I'll see you guys in the next video.